According to recent reports, there have been shortages of supply of hormone replacement therapies. The shortage appears to be particularly acute for estrogen passages. Today, we are happy to be joined by Dr. Stephanie Faubion, the director of the Mayo Clinic Center for Women's Health and the medical director for the Menopause Society. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
So we're hearing about some shortages for common HRT. Tell me, are you're definitely on the front lines of this. Are you hearing some instances and some talk about this?
Yes, that's a great question. We are hearing some, although I have to say it's sporadic and it's some doses and not other doses. So it's patchy. It can be a little hit or miss. And usually, if we rewrite the prescription, if they couldn't get the once a week patch, we do the twice a week patch, or we get to the dose a little bit in a different way by either doing two lower dose patches together. So usually we can cobble it together. But I think this is sort of occurring because we have more women asking about hormone therapy than have in the past. We
Mhm.
don't have data yet that more women are actually using it yet. And I'll tell you a preview for an abstract that we published over a year ago now, but the paper is about to come out that says that hormone therapy usage rates in this country are still at an all-time low at 1.7%. So that was as of the end of 2023. So we don't have data over the last year, 2 years, to say that there's been an uptick, but it appears to be the case. But we know that hormone therapy usage rates were really, really very low.
Interesting. So some people have said that this recent uptick in use or shortage, however you want to look at it, is a result of the FDA requiring makers to change the labeling on the hormone replacement therapy packaging. And do you think that there's any truth to that? Or do you think there are some other important factors that are really driving this?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I could pin it to that specifically. Although that may have contributed to more women using hormone therapy. Most of the women who are in my office really have no idea that any boxed warning has been removed.
Mhm.
So I think it's more than that. I think it's that women and clinicians and people in general are talking about menopause much more so now than in the past, which is a good thing. And so I think women are starting to ask questions about, well, are all these symptoms related? And are there any treatments? And what about hormone therapy? And can I be using it? Is it safe for me? So I think there's a lot more discussion around menopause in general. And I've written about this quite extensively about what has caused this to be a thing now. And I think it's a combination of things. I think this is a different generation than the baby boomers who really didn't talk about things like menopause in public. So we have a different generation, the Gen Xers, and the first of the millennials are now in the age range where they would start to experience symptoms. And hearing that there's nothing that can be done for their symptoms is not acceptable to this
Right.
generation, and you got to love it. So they're not only asking for answers, they're crowdsourcing answers and using social media to do so. So I think we have a very different generation. We also have this generation of women, they're educated. A lot of them have money and their own jobs, and they have a need that has not been fulfilled. And so that sucking sound, that vacuum, has created an industry around menopause now, which did not exist before. So I think there are a number of factors that are playing into this, what we're seeing, and I think it's way bigger than just the last couple of months.
So I'd like you step back for just a second because you raised some really interesting questions there. One of the things that, and I guess it's kind of generational thing. I'm aging myself. Um, I think some of the women who are a little bit older, when they think about hormone replacement therapy, um, there was the Women's Health Initiative report that came out a long time ago, which I think there's a bit of a legacy still there. I'm kind of curious what your opinion is. If you could just for the audience's sake, maybe not everybody is familiar exactly what I'm talking about. I'm sure you are, more than anybody. But if you take a step back and go into that context and kind of talk about what your feeling is on kind of people's perception about the safety of hormone replacement.
Yeah. So backing up, that's part of the sucking sound was the Women's Health Initiative.
Right.
So, okay, I'm gonna back up one point further than that, and we don't call it hormone replacement therapy anymore. We
Okay.
call it hormone therapy, and the reason for that, we don't use the replacement part because we're not actually trying to replace what the ovary used to make premenopausally. We are trying to manage symptoms, and the dose required to manage symptoms is way lower than the dose that would be required to fully replace the ovary if the ovary wasn't there or wasn't working. So the new term is hormone therapy rather than replacement.
Thank you very much.
Um, okay, so the Women's Health Initiative, very important key study. The initial results were published July 9th, 2002, which anyone in the menopause world remembers the date that it actually came out because it was such an impactful thing. And it was also reported in a way that was very scary. So, part of it was in the way that the information was disseminated and distributed was problematic, in that there were women in this trial in their 50s, in their 60s, and in their 70s. So, they were looking at, does hormone therapy actually prevent chronic disease? That was the whole reason for this trial, and they enrolled women 50 to the age of 79. The mean age of those women was 63. So these were, on average, older women than those we actually see in our offices. The average age of menopause in this country is about 51 to 52 years of age. And so these were women that were significantly past that for the most part. They reported all the data together in one big mishmash group. And they said, you know what? Hormone therapy is not as safe as we thought. And it not only does not prevent chronic disease, it can actually increase the risk of cardiovascular disease, so heart attack, stroke, blood clot, et cetera. And there was a secondary outcome of breast cancer that also was increased in that group. Now, all of these risks were relatively very quite rare in younger women. And if you eventually they got around to breaking down the data by decade of life. So they isolated women in their 50s from those in their 60s, from those in their 70s. And what we ended up finding out is for those women in their 50s, which is typically who is in the office complaining about menopause symptoms, that hormone therapy was actually pretty safe. And for those women, the risk of heart attack and stroke is quite rare anyway because these are younger women. So we've learned a lot in the interim, but we did see some unexpected results in that trial. They ended up stopping the estrogen alone trial early as well, and that was stopped a couple of years later. We got those reports about 2004, and estrogen alone looked better in general in terms of risk benefits than estrogen plus progesterone. Now, the combo has to be used in women who still have a uterus because using estrogen alone makes the uterine lining grow too much. The estrogen alone group, those were women who had had a prior hysterectomy. In general, the risks were less in those women who had a hysterectomy who could use estrogen alone. So backing up from that, hormone therapy usage rates plummeted dramatically when the trial results were released in 2002. And part of it was the way it was reported out. These were actually pretty rare events that were happening, but the messaging was everybody should stop using hormone therapy. And whereas before the WHI, about a quarter of the women in the United States were using systemic hormone therapy. It was the most commonly prescribed drug, bar none, more than antidepressants, more than anything. After that, the usage rates dropped to about 4 to 6%, so orders of magnitude down. And as I said, we're about to publish data that they're about 1.7% now. So we have continued to not only rebound, but we've continued to go down in terms of the percentage of women using hormone therapy over time. So the fact that we have a shortage of patches now is not necessarily a bad thing. It may be that more women are actually taking advantage of this. Now, does this mean that all women should be on hormone therapy? Absolutely not. It does not. And I just want to make that clear.
Sure. So because one of the things that we're always most concerned about is delivering news you can use. What are the factors that you know for women should either trigger using it or not using it? I mean, I think part of the message, we were talking about the role of the media. Obviously, as media, we have to take responsibility, but part of what we see our responsibility as is uh, helping people understand it's not always black and white. It's not binary. It's not yes or no. Depending upon your circumstances, one thing is going to be right for one person, it might be wrong for another person. So, with that, can you maybe help put it in the context of, for people who are listening, yeah, this is all great, but should I be considering it or not?
Yeah, so let's break that into who should take it and who should not take it. So let's start with the who should not take it. Um, in general, we think the best candidate is under the age of 60 or not and or less than 10 years past menopause onset. So therefore the flip of that, who should not take it, typically women over 60 or had their last period 10 years or more ago. I will make a caveat that say you're 58 years, you stopped your periods at 58 and you're now 62, you're still a candidate for starting hormone therapy because you're within 10 years of menopause onset. But if you're 62 and you had your last period at 48, probably outside of the window for both safety and at that point, I mean, the main factor is going to be safety at that point, but there are other things that we can do for hot flash management. And that's not to say we have nothing to offer. That's not true. Um, Contraindications. So, who should not take it? Women with a history of breast cancer, women with a history of heart attack, a history of stroke, a history of blood clot, severe liver disease, that's pretty much it. We also say undiagnosed vaginal bleeding, but in my book, vaginal bleeding shouldn't be undiagnosed. We should know why we're having vaginal bleeding. And the concern there would be the possibility of a uterine cancer that hasn't been detected yet. So the list for who shouldn't take hormone therapy is actually fairly small. Um, so who should take it? So we'll go back to the age and the time since menopause criteria. If you're younger than 60 or within 10 years of menopause onset and having bothersome symptoms like hot flashes, night sweats, sleep disturbances, mood disturbances, all the things that are really impacting your life. So not just a little bit, but having an impact to where you say, yes, I would do something about these if I could. That would be the woman that we would want to talk about. The other thing that we look at when you're in the office is what is your risk for heart disease? We look at cardiovascular risk factors. If you have, for example, diabetes or high blood pressure, it doesn't mean that you're not a candidate for hormone therapy, but it might affect the type of hormone therapy and the route of delivery that we give to you. So, for example, we might use a transdermal patch instead of an oral pill. Because the transdermal patch may have some safety advantages over the oral formulation because it doesn't have to go through the liver to get digested. If you go through the liver to get digested, you can increase blood clot proteins. That increases risk of blood clot, heart attack, stroke, just like a birth control pill would do. So sometimes the patch is a safer route of administration for women that may have some cardiovascular risk factors. If, however, you're high risk for heart disease, like you've already had a heart attack or you're very high risk, we might not use hormone therapy in you. And for those women, again, there's always treatment options available, but we might go with a non-hormonal medication.
Great. Getting back to the education issue, the Menopause Society in their journal Menopause is coming out with a study about education for doctors, not just patients, which talks about the effects and the importance of education for medical professionals. And uh, when I saw the report, I thought it was interesting, um, particularly because it talked about the significant positive effects of the education, where I would have thought, well, at this point, all the general practitioners, doctors kind of know everything that there is to know about menopause. But so I'm curious. I know you were involved in the study. I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, and to be clear, it was not my study. I just commented on it. So I just gave my opinion about it. Uh, let's talk about education on menopause. So when the WHI came out in 2002 and nobody used hormone therapy anymore after that, nobody taught menopause anymore because in essence, there was nothing you could do about it. So it fell out of the medical school and residency curricula at that time. And it wasn't taught for literally a couple of generations. And now we have generations of healthcare professionals who have absolutely no education in menopause management. So you assume that clinicians know about menopause. I can assure you that they do not. And having had a child just graduate from medical school, I can also tell you that she did not receive any menopause education in medical school. To the defense of her medical school, however, they didn't have room in the curriculum for genetics either. So the curriculum was so incredibly packed, and there's so much those kids have to learn now that they're expected to know these things. They're expected to learn these things, and they're actually tested on them, but they're not included in it. Not everything is in the curriculum. So I think we need to understand some of the limitations of our educational system. Similarly, we did a study of residency programs in internal medicine, family medicine, and OBGYN that was published, I believe, 2019, that showed in those residency programs, the large majority of people who were getting out did not receive more than an hour or so of education on menopause and did not feel comfortable managing menopause. And that included OBGYN residents. So I think that shows that we still have critical gaps in our education. And I'm just talking about physicians, but we also have nurses, physician's assistants, pharmacists, the whole nurse practitioners, the whole list of healthcare professionals that require education on this topic that still have gaps.
And what is the Menopause Society doing for the education? I know there's some programs from healthcare professionals, but also for women who are getting to the age where they're starting to think about it.
That's exactly right. And thank you for mentioning the Menopause Society. So we have been very fortunate to receive two donor gifts recently in the total amount of $10 million. And that is being entirely dedicated toward education in general and the building of a platform that will help support that. So the initiative is called Next Gen Now. And it's figuring out so adults learn differently now than they did before. We used to give hour-long lectures as a matter of routine 20 years ago, and turns out people don't really learn well when you sit there and lecture to them for an hour. And many people digest it a lot better in small snippets. And so we are aiming to take this to where people are. It can be point of care in the office when they're taking care of a patient, or it can be when you're in the car and you want to just listen to a small vignette, or it can be more in depth things like some of our materials, like our evidence based hormone therapy position statement. So there are many different forms that education can take, and we are hoping to tailor that to the learner, but also make it a smart learning system to where this system understands where you are in terms of your learning, and if you need a little bit of a deeper dive in one area or another, and it can provide you with that more advanced education. So hopefully, this is going to help with the clinician side. Now, the patient side, for all of our learning materials, and especially like the hormone therapy position statement, the non-hormone position statement, we also make matching patient-facing pieces that clinicians can provide to the patients they see in the office, and these are also available to women. So we our primary mission as a society is educating clinicians and healthcare professionals, but we also want that evidence to disseminate and get to women themselves. So we're trying to make it easy or easier for clinicians to do that very thing, to serve the women that are in their offices.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. And I hope that we'll have a chance to talk again soon.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.